If you're looking for shortcuts, easy money, or someone to change your life for you, close this video now. If you don't like learning, don't like discipline, and don't want to become better than you were yesterday, this video isn't for you. But if you're one of the few people who can listen, think, and take action, stay with me until the end. The truth is, most people will click away. Most people will never apply what they learn. That's why most people stay exactly where they are. The ideas you're about to hear aren't taught by most large channels, and very few people are willing to follow them. So if you're serious about growth, success, wealth, and becoming the person others refuse to become, subscribe to the channel. I want to know how many of us are still out there. Now let's begin. You're not where you want to be. Deep down, you already know that. Maybe you've known it for years. And if you're honest with yourself, you've probably developed a long list of explanations for why your life looks the way it does today. Maybe it's the economy. Maybe it's your upbringing. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's the opportunities you never received. Maybe it's the boss who overlooked you. Maybe it's the relationship that cost you years. Maybe it's the bad timing, the bad luck, the wrong place, the wrong people, the circumstances that never seemed fair. And here's what's dangerous about all of those explanations. Many of them contain truth. That's what makes them so convincing. That's what makes them so difficult to let go of. Because when an explanation contains some truth, it becomes easy to mistake it for the whole truth. But what if the biggest thing holding you back isn't any of those circumstances? What if the real obstacle has been hiding behind those explanations the entire time? What if the thing keeping you stuck isn't what happened to you, but the story you've continued telling yourself about what happened to you? That's uncomfortable. I know. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding that question. Because the moment you ask it honestly, you can no longer hide behind the comfort of your reasons. And reasons are comfortable. They protect us. They preserve our self-image. They allow us to believe that the problem exists somewhere outside of us. And if the problem exists outside of us, then we don't have to change. We can wait. We can hope. We can complain. We can explain. We can point to the circumstances and say, that's why. But here's the truth very few people are willing to face. As long as the cause of your situation lives outside of you, the solution will live outside of you too. And that means you wait. You wait for better conditions. You wait for better opportunities. You wait for better people. You wait for better timing. You wait for life to finally cooperate. And while you're waiting, the years keep passing. The most expensive thing in the world isn't failure. It's delay. It's spending year after year maintaining explanations instead of creating change. Because every year spent explaining is a year not spent building. Every year spent justifying is a year not spent improving. Every year spent describing the problem is a year not spent solving it. And eventually something strange begins to happen. The explanation becomes your identity. You stop saying, this happened to me, and you start saying, this is who I am. You stop viewing yourself as someone passing through a difficult season. You start viewing yourself as someone defined by that season. And once that happens, change becomes harder, not because change is impossible, but because you've spent so long describing your reality that you've forgotten you have the power to reshape it. So today I want to walk you through something most people never fully understand. I want to walk you through 5 powerful ideas, not about blame, not about guilt, not about pretending life has been fair. This isn't about denying reality. It's about reclaiming responsibility. It's about taking back the steering wheel of your life. Because whether you realize it or not, many people have quietly handed that steering wheel away. They handed it to circumstances. They handed it to the past. They handed it to other people. They handed it to events they can no longer control. And then they wonder why their life keeps moving in directions they never intended. Before we get into those 5 ideas, however, you must understand something critical. You must understand the hidden cost of explanation. Because most people never see it. Most people believe their explanations are harmless. They think they're simply describing reality. They think they're being realistic, practical, objective. But explanations are rarely neutral. Explanations consume energy. Every explanation you carry requires maintenance. Every story requires reinforcement. Every justification demands attention. And attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Think about it. The human mind has limited bandwidth. You cannot focus on everything simultaneously. If your mind is constantly occupied with reasons for why something can't happen, it's not focused on discovering how it can happen. If your attention is consumed by defending your current situation, it cannot be fully invested in changing that situation. And that's where the trap begins, because explanations don't merely describe reality, they help create reality. Read that again. Explanations don't merely describe reality, they help create reality. If you've spent 10 years explaining why your career isn't where you want it to be, those explanations have likely contributed to keeping it exactly where it is. If you've spent years explaining why your finances never improve, those explanations may have become part of the mechanism that prevents improvement. If you've spent years explaining why your relationships never work, those explanations may be helping recreate the same patterns again and again, because explanations often replace action. The story becomes a substitute for movement, and once the story is in place, action feels unnecessary. After all, if you've already identified the reason you're stuck, why keep looking? The explanation creates psychological closure. It allows the mind to stop searching. It gives you an answer, but an answer is not the same thing as a solution, and most people confuse the two. The explanation satisfies the mind. The solution changes the life. They're not the same. That's why so many intelligent people stay stuck, not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack awareness, but because they've become experts at explaining. They can explain every disappointment, every setback, every missed opportunity, every failure, every frustration. They can tell you exactly why things happened, but they cannot tell you what they're doing next. And that's the difference, because life ultimately rewards movement, not explanation, action, not justification, responsibility, not excuses. You see, explanations create the illusion of progress, action creates actual progress, and there is a massive difference between those two things. One feels productive, the other is productive. One sounds intelligent, the other produces results. One keeps you safe, the other moves you forward. For many people, the explanation becomes so familiar that they stop questioning it altogether. It becomes automatic. The story runs in the background of their mind, day after day, year after year, without examination, without challenge, without interruption. Eventually, they don't even hear it anymore. They simply experience it as reality. They say things like, "That's just how life is. People like me don't get those opportunities. Things never work out for me. I'm too old now. I missed my chance. The economy won't allow it. My background makes it impossible." And every time those statements are repeated, the walls grow thicker. The prison becomes stronger. Not because the circumstances changed, because the story did. Or rather, because the story never changed. Here's something worth considering. Imagine two people facing the exact same obstacle, same economy, same environment, same limitations, same challenges. One person spends years explaining why they can't move forward. The other spends years asking, "What can I do next?" The obstacle is identical. The circumstances are identical. Yet the outcomes become radically different. Why? Because one person invested energy in explanation. The other invested energy in action. One focused on causes. The other focused on responses. One became a passenger. The other became a driver. And that distinction changes everything. You see, there is a hidden law operating beneath almost every successful life. Successful people are not necessarily those who faced fewer obstacles. Very often they faced enormous obstacles. The difference is that they refuse to make the obstacle the final chapter. They refuse to allow circumstances to become identity. They refuse to allow explanations to become destiny. Instead, they asked a different question. Not, "Why did this happen?" but "What do I do now?" Not, "Who's responsible?" but "What's my next move?" Not, "Why is this unfair?" but "How do I respond?" That shift seems small. It's not. That shift changes everything. Because the quality of your future is determined less by what happened to you, and more by what you decide to do next. The future is not built from explanations. It's built from decisions. And decisions require responsibility. This is why so many people remain trapped. Responsibility feels heavy. Explanation feels light. Explanation says, "It wasn't my fault." Responsibility says, "Maybe it wasn't my fault, but it's still my life." Explanation seeks comfort. Responsibility seeks power. Explanation protects the ego. Responsibility builds the future. And while responsibility is heavier in the short term, it is infinitely lighter in the long term. Because carrying responsibility eventually produces results. Carrying explanations produces stagnation. One creates momentum, the other creates repetition. One expands your possibilities, the other narrows them. One moves life forward, the other freezes it in place. And here's the tragedy. Most people don't realize they're doing it. They don't wake up and consciously decide to become stuck. They don't choose mediocrity. They don't choose stagnation. They simply choose explanations often enough that explanations become habits. And habits become identity. And identity becomes destiny. That's why the first breakthrough is awareness. You have to see the pattern. You have to recognize it. You have to notice the moments when your mind automatically reaches for explanation instead of action. Because once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. And the moment you interrupt it, a new possibility appears. A possibility that may have been available all along. The possibility that your future is not waiting for different circumstances. The possibility that your future is waiting for a different response. The possibility that the life you want has been sitting quietly behind years of explanation, waiting, patiently, for you to stop describing and start driving. And that's where we'll begin. Because the first thing you must understand is this. Many of your explanations may be true, but truth alone is not enough. The real question is whether those explanations are helping you move forward, or quietly keeping you exactly where you are. Now let's go deeper. Because recognizing the trap of explanation is only the beginning. Awareness opens the door, but awareness alone does not change a life. Many people become aware of their patterns and still remain exactly where they are. Why? Because insight without action is merely entertainment. Knowledge without application changes nothing. You can read every book, listen to every podcast, attend every seminar, watch every motivational video, and still remain stuck. Not because the information was wrong, but because information does not create transformation. Application does. This brings us to the first major principle that separates people who move forward from people who remain trapped: the principle of ownership. Ownership is one of the most misunderstood concepts in personal development. Many people hear the word and immediately become defensive. They assume ownership means blame. It doesn't. Ownership and blame are completely different things. Blame is focused on the past. Ownership is focused on the future. Blame asks, whose fault is this? Ownership asks, what can I do about it? Blame looks backward. Ownership looks forward. Blame searches for culprits. Ownership searches for solutions. And the difference between those two approaches can determine the direction of an entire life. Imagine for a moment that someone crashes into your parked car. You weren't driving. You weren't responsible. You did nothing wrong. Clearly the accident wasn't your fault, but when it's time to repair the damage, whose responsibility is it? Yours. Not because you caused it, because it's your car. Life works the same way. Many things happen that aren't your fault. People betray you. Opportunities disappear. Markets collapse. Relationships end. Promises get broken. Unexpected hardships arrive without warning. None of those things may be your fault, but they are still your responsibility to handle. And the moment you understand that distinction, something powerful happens. You stop waiting. You stop waiting for fairness. You stop waiting for justice. You stop waiting for someone else to fix what was broken. Instead, you begin building, you begin adapting, you begin moving. And movement changes everything. One of the greatest dangers in life is developing what psychologists often call a victim mindset. Notice I didn't say being a victim. Those are not the same thing. Sometimes people genuinely experience terrible circumstances. Real pain, real hardship, real injustice. Those experiences are real. But a victim mindset occurs when a person begins to believe they have no power over their future. When they begin to see themselves as permanently controlled by circumstances. When they assume that because something happened to them, it must continue defining them forever. That's where progress stops. Because progress requires agency. Progress requires the belief that your decisions matter. Progress requires the belief that your decisions influence outcomes. Without that belief, motivation disappears. Why work hard if nothing can change? Why improve if improvement won't matter? Why try if the result is already determined? This is why mindset matters so much. Not because positive thinking magically changes reality, but because your beliefs determine your behavior, and your behavior determines your outcomes. People often underestimate how powerful this cycle becomes over time. Belief influences action. Action influences results. Results reinforce belief. Then the cycle repeats. If you believe you're capable, you'll take more action. More action produces more opportunities. More opportunities create better results. Better results strengthen confidence, and confidence encourages even more action. The cycle compounds, but the reverse is also true. If you believe you're powerless, you'll hesitate. Hesitation, reduced action. Reduced action limits opportunity. Limited opportunity produces disappointing results. Those results reinforce feelings of powerlessness, and the cycle compounds in the opposite direction. Most lives are not transformed overnight. Most lives are transformed through repeated cycles, small decisions, repeated consistently, day after day, month after month, year after year. That's why ownership is so powerful. Ownership interrupts destructive cycles. Ownership reintroduces personal power. Ownership reminds you that while you cannot control everything, you can always control something. And sometimes that something is enough to change everything. Think about history. Think about the individuals who achieved extraordinary things despite overwhelming odds. They weren't handed perfect circumstances. They weren't protected from setbacks. They weren't exempt from hardship. Many faced obstacles larger than anything most people encounter, yet they moved forward anyway. Why? Because they focused on what remained within their control. They focused on the next step, the next decision, the next improvement, the next opportunity, the next action. They understood something most people forget. Life is rarely won through giant breakthroughs. Life is usually won through small, consistent victories. A better decision today, a better habit tomorrow, a better attitude next week, a better routine next month, a better version of yourself next year. That's how momentum is created, and momentum is one of the most powerful forces in human achievement. Momentum changes how you think. Momentum changes how you feel. Momentum changes what you believe is possible. When you're stuck, everything feels difficult. Every task feels larger than it really is. Every challenge feels overwhelming. Every goal feels distant. But once momentum begins, something shifts. Progress creates energy. Action creates confidence. Movement creates motivation. Many people mistakenly believe motivation creates action. In reality, action often creates motivation. Waiting to feel motivated is one of the biggest mistakes people make. Because motivation is unreliable. Some days you'll feel inspired. Some days you won't. Some days you'll feel unstoppable. Some days you'll feel exhausted. If your progress depends on your emotions, your progress will always be inconsistent. Successful people understand this. They don't rely exclusively on motivation. They rely on commitment. Commitment survives bad moods. Commitment survives difficult seasons. Commitment survives uncertainty. Commitment continues moving even when excitement disappears. And this is where discipline enters the picture. Discipline is often portrayed as punishment, but true discipline is actually freedom. It frees you from dependence on emotion. It frees you from waiting for perfect conditions. It frees you from needing inspiration before action. Discipline allows you to move regardless of how you feel. And that is an extraordinary advantage, because feelings change constantly. Principles do not. Imagine two people pursuing the same goal. One works only when inspired. The other works consistently. Who wins? The answer is obvious. Consistency always defeats occasional intensity. Always. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But eventually. The person who keeps showing up gains an advantage that compounds over time. A small advantage today. A slightly larger advantage tomorrow. A substantial advantage next year. An enormous advantage over a decade. That's how extraordinary success is usually built. Not through a single heroic effort, but through thousands of ordinary efforts repeated consistently. Most people are searching for shortcuts. They want a breakthrough. They want a secret. They want a hack. They want a miracle. But success is rarely hidden. The principles are usually simple. Simple doesn't mean easy. Simple means clear. The challenge isn't understanding what to do. The challenge is doing it long enough for the results to appear. That's where most people quit. Not because the strategy failed, because the timeline frustrated them. We live in a world obsessed with speed. Everyone wants immediate results, immediate wealth, immediate success, immediate recognition, immediate transformation. But nature doesn't work that way. And neither does meaningful achievement. A seed becomes a tree through seasons, not seconds. A body becomes stronger through repetition, not wishes. A career becomes successful through years of effort, not a weekend of enthusiasm. Everything worthwhile takes time, and this is where patience becomes essential. Patience isn't passive. Patience is active persistence. It's continuing to work while waiting for results. It's continuing to improve while progress remains invisible. It's continuing to believe while evidence is still limited. Many people quit right before the breakthrough, not because they lacked ability, not because they lacked talent, because they lacked patience. They planted the seed, watered it briefly, then dug it up every week to check for growth. Success doesn't work that way. Growth often occurs beneath the surface before it becomes visible above it. The roots develop first, then the results appear. That's true in business. It's true in relationships. It's true in finances. It's true in personal development. The visible success people admire is usually the final chapter of a much longer story, a story filled with quiet work, private sacrifices, repeated failures, daily discipline, and countless moments where quitting would have been easier, yet they continued. And because they continued, they eventually arrived somewhere most people never reach, not because they were extraordinary, but because they remained committed long enough for ordinary efforts to become extraordinary results. That's the power of ownership. That's the power of responsibility. That's the power of discipline. And that's where real change begins, not when circumstances improve, but when you decide that, regardless of circumstances, you're moving forward anyway. Because the moment you fully accept ownership of your future, something remarkable happens. You stop asking whether success is possible, and you start asking what actions are required. That single shift can change the entire trajectory of your life. Now let's talk about something that silently determines the direction of almost every life: the environment you place yourself in. Most people underestimate the influence of their environment because it operates quietly. It doesn't usually arrive with a dramatic announcement. It doesn't force itself upon you all at once. Instead, it shapes your thinking gradually, day by day, conversation by conversation, influence by influence, until one day you wake up and realize you've become very similar to the people and ideas surrounding you. Whether you intended to or not, human beings are adaptive by nature. We absorb attitudes, we absorb beliefs, we absorb expectations, we absorb standards. This happens automatically, which means one of the most important questions you can ever ask yourself is this: what am I exposing myself to every day? Because whatever you expose yourself to repeatedly eventually becomes normal, and what becomes normal begins shaping your identity. Think about that carefully. If you're constantly surrounded by negativity, eventually negativity feels normal. If you're constantly surrounded by excuses, eventually excuses sound reasonable. If you're constantly surrounded by mediocrity, eventually mediocrity feels acceptable. But the opposite is equally true. If you're surrounded by growth, growth becomes normal. If you're surrounded by discipline, discipline becomes normal. If you're surrounded by excellence, excellence becomes normal. This is why environment matters so much. Not because it controls you, but because it influences what you consider possible. Many people never reach their potential because they've never seen their potential reflected around them. They've spent years in environments where small thinking was rewarded, where ambition was criticized, where dreaming bigger was viewed as arrogance, where growth made other people uncomfortable. Eventually, they learned to shrink themselves, not because they lacked ability, because they adapted to their surroundings. And adaptation is powerful. In some situations, it helps us survive. In others, it quietly limits us. I remember speaking with a young entrepreneur years ago. He had tremendous potential: intelligent, hardworking, creative, ambitious. Yet every time he discussed a new goal, the people around him laughed. Not maliciously, just habitually. They couldn't understand why anyone would want more, why anyone would take risks, why anyone would pursue something uncertain. Their worldview was built around safety and predictability, and because that was their worldview, they projected it onto him. Over time, he began doubting himself, not because his goals were unrealistic, because constant exposure to skepticism slowly eroded his confidence. Eventually, he changed environments. He started spending time around business owners, builders, leaders, people who believed growth was possible. And something remarkable happened. His thinking expanded, his standards rose, his confidence returned, his results improved dramatically. What changed? His intelligence didn't change, his potential didn't change, his environment changed, and the new environment gave him permission to think differently. This is one of the most powerful truths you'll ever discover. Sometimes growth requires a new environment, not because the old environment is evil, but because it may no longer support the future you're trying to create. You cannot spend every day in a freezing room and expect tropical plants to thrive. The conditions matter. The atmosphere matters.
The influences matter. The conversations matter. Every environment is creating something. The question is whether it's creating the future you want. This doesn't only apply to people, it applies to information. The books you read, the content you consume, the voices you listen to, the stories you repeat, the messages you allow into your mind. All of these become part of your environment. And in today's world, information is everywhere. Never in human history have people had access to so much knowledge, yet many remain trapped in cycles of distraction. Why? Because access to information is not the same as access to wisdom. Many people consume information all day long, but very little of it actually improves their lives. They're entertained, distracted, stimulated, but not transformed. Transformation requires intentional input. It requires selecting information that challenges you, information that stretches your thinking, information that raises your standards, information that helps you become more capable. Your mind is like a garden. Whatever you plant repeatedly will eventually grow. Plant negativity, and negativity grows. Plant possibility, and possibility grows. Plant fear, and fear grows. Plant confidence, and confidence grows. The mind responds to repetition. That's why successful people are extremely selective about what they allow into their mental environment. They understand that attention is valuable. Every thought you entertain repeatedly becomes stronger. Every belief you reinforce becomes more influential. Every idea you revisit gains power. The quality of your thinking ultimately determines the quality of your decisions, and the quality of your decisions determines the quality of your life. This is why personal growth is never accidental. It is intentional, deliberate, purposeful. You don't accidentally become stronger. You don't accidentally become disciplined. You don't accidentally become exceptional. You become those things through repeated choices, through conscious decisions, through daily investment in yourself. And here's something most people don't fully appreciate. The greatest investment you'll ever make is not in a stock, not in real estate, not in a business. It's in yourself. Because every external result eventually traces back to internal development. Income often follows value. Value follows skill. Skill follows learning. Learning follows curiosity. And curiosity follows mindset. Everything connects. That's why the highest return investment is often personal growth. A person who improves their thinking improves their decisions. Improved decisions create improved opportunities. Improved opportunities create improved outcomes. The chain reaction begins internally before it becomes visible externally. Yet many people spend years trying to improve outcomes without improving themselves. They want different results while maintaining identical habits, different income while maintaining identical skills, different opportunities while maintaining identical thinking. But life doesn't usually work that way. The external world often mirrors the internal world. Change inside, and eventually you'll begin seeing change outside. This process takes patience, but it works. Always. One of the biggest misconceptions about success is the belief that successful people somehow possess qualities unavailable to everyone else. People look at extraordinary achievement and assume extraordinary genetics, extraordinary luck, extraordinary talent. Sometimes those factors play a role, but far more often, success is built through ordinary actions repeated over extraordinary periods of time. That's the truth many people don't want to hear, because it's less exciting than the fantasy. The fantasy says someone discovered a shortcut. The reality says someone developed discipline. The fantasy says someone got lucky. The reality says someone stayed committed longer than everyone else. The fantasy says someone found an easy path. The reality says someone embraced difficult work consistently. And consistency is where most people struggle, not because consistency is complicated, because consistency is boring, at least in the beginning. There's nothing glamorous about repetition, nothing dramatic about daily discipline, nothing exciting about showing up when no one is watching. But that's where greatness is built. In the ordinary moments, the invisible moments, the moments nobody applauds. Think about an athlete preparing for competition. The crowd sees the performance. They don't see the training. The audience sees the victory. They don't see the sacrifices. They see the highlight. They don't see the thousands of hours that made the highlight possible. Life works the same way. Most people only see outcomes. They rarely see the process. That's why comparison can be so dangerous. You're comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to someone else's highlight reel, and that's never an accurate comparison. Every successful person has struggled. Every successful person has doubted themselves. Every successful person has faced setbacks. The difference is they continued anyway. They didn't interpret obstacles as signs to quit. They interpreted obstacles as part of the journey. And that perspective changes everything. Because challenges are inevitable, no goal exists without obstacles. No dream exists without difficulty. No worthwhile achievement exists without difficulty. No worthwhile achievement exists without difficulty. No worthwhile achievement do justs. The question isn't whether you'll encounter challenges. The question is how you'll respond when they arrive. Some people retreat, some people adapt, some people grow stronger. The challenge itself often matters less than the response. This is where resilience becomes essential. Resilience isn't about avoiding adversity, it's about recovering from it, learning from it, growing through it. Life will test you repeatedly, not because life is unfair, because growth requires resistance. A muscle grows through resistance, character grows through resistance, wisdom grows through resistance, confidence grows through resistance. Everything meaningful is strengthened through challenge. The people who understand this stop fearing difficulty. They begin respecting it because they recognize that every challenge contains an opportunity. Not always obvious, not always immediate, but present nonetheless. A setback can teach patience. A failure can teach strategy. A disappointment can teach perspective. A struggle can teach resilience. Nothing is wasted if you're willing to learn. That's one of the most powerful attitudes you can develop. The attitude of a student of life, a student of growth, a student of experience. Students remain curious, they remain open, they remain adaptable. And adaptability is one of the most valuable qualities in a rapidly changing world. The world changes, industries change, technology changes, markets change, opportunities change. People who refuse to adapt eventually become trapped by outdated thinking. But people who remain flexible continue finding new possibilities. They evolve, they learn, they grow, and growth creates opportunity. The future belongs to people willing to evolve, not abandon their principles, but update their strategies, not compromise their values, but expand their capabilities. Growth requires humility, because growth requires admitting there is more to learn. And there is always more to learn, always. The moment someone believes they know everything, they stop growing. The moment they stop growing, they begin falling behind. Success is not a destination, it's a process. A continual process of learning, improving, adapting, expanding, becoming. And perhaps that's the most important realization of all. The goal isn't merely achieving success. The goal is becoming the person capable of sustaining it. Because achievement without growth is fragile, but achievement built upon character, discipline, resilience, and continuous improvement can last a lifetime. That's why your environment matters. That's why your habits matter. That's why your mindset matters. Because every one of those factors contributes to the person you're becoming. And ultimately, the person you're becoming determines the future you're creating. Now let's discuss one of the greatest misconceptions people have about success. Many believe success is primarily about achievement, reaching a certain income, owning a certain house, building a certain business, accumulating a certain level of status. And while achievement certainly matters, there is something far more important: the person you become in the process. Because every goal eventually creates a question most people never consider. What happens after you achieve it? Think about that. What happens after the promotion? After the business grows? After the money arrives? After the recognition comes? After the dream becomes reality? Many people spend years imagining that success will permanently solve their problems, that achievement will create lasting fulfillment, that one major accomplishment will finally make them feel complete. But life has a way of teaching a different lesson. Achievements create satisfaction, but satisfaction is temporary. Growth creates fulfillment, and fulfillment lasts much longer. This is why some people achieve enormous success and still feel empty. They focused entirely on outcomes while neglecting personal development. They built external success without building internal strength. The result is fragile success, success that looks impressive from the outside but feels hollow from within. True success requires both external achievement and internal growth, results and character, accomplishment and purpose. Because if success cost your peace, was it really success? If success cost your relationships, your health, your values, or your self-respect, then the price may have been too high. That's why sustainable success must be built on a strong foundation. And that foundation is character. Character reveals itself when nobody is watching. Character reveals itself when shortcuts are available. Character reveals itself when pressure increases. Anyone can behave well when conditions are easy. Character appears when conditions become difficult, when nobody would know, when excuses seem reasonable, when compromise appears convenient. Those moments reveal who you truly are, and over time, character becomes one of your greatest assets. Because trust is built upon character, leadership is built upon character, influence is built upon character, long-term success is built upon character. People often spend years trying to improve their image, but image and character are not the same thing. Image is what people think you are. Character is what you actually are. Image can be manufactured. Character cannot. Image attracts attention. Character earns respect, and respect is infinitely more valuable. Because attention is temporary, respect endures. This is particularly important in a world obsessed with appearances. Social media has created an environment where many people are rewarded for looking successful. But looking successful and being successful are not the same thing. One requires presentation, the other requires substance. One is temporary, the other is durable. One depends on perception, the other depends on reality. Eventually, reality always wins. That's why substance matters. That's why depth matters. That's why becoming matters more than appearing. The strongest foundations are built quietly. The strongest people are developed privately. The greatest transformations often occur long before anyone notices. And this principle applies to every area of life. A strong body isn't built in one workout. A strong relationship isn't built in one conversation. A strong business isn't built in one sale. A strong reputation isn't built in one decision. Everything meaningful is constructed through accumulation. Small actions, repeated consistently, over long periods of time. Most people understand this intellectually, but very few truly embrace it emotionally. Because emotionally, we want faster results. We want visible progress. We want immediate confirmation that our efforts are working. Yet many of life's greatest rewards require delayed gratification, and delayed gratification is becoming increasingly rare. We're surrounded by instant entertainment, instant purchases, instant communication, instant access, instant stimulation. The modern world conditions people to expect immediate rewards, but success often operates according to a completely different timeline. The greatest rewards frequently arrive later, sometimes much later. And that's where faith becomes important. Not necessarily religious faith, but faith in the process, faith in your effort, faith in your growth, faith that today's investment will eventually produce tomorrow's reward. Without that faith, consistency becomes difficult, because there will be periods when progress feels invisible, periods when effort appears unrewarded, periods when results seem delayed. Every meaningful journey includes those seasons. Every one. The entrepreneur experiences them, the athlete experiences them, the artist experiences them, the leader experiences them, the investor experiences them, the student experiences them. Everyone experiences them. The difference is how they respond. Some interpret delayed results as failure, others interpret delayed results as part of the process, and that interpretation determines whether they continue. Imagine two people planting seeds. Both plant on the same day, both water consistently, both care for the soil, but one becomes impatient. After a short period of time, he concludes nothing is happening. He quits. The other continues. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Eventually, growth appears. The difference wasn't intelligence, it wasn't talent, it wasn't luck, it was persistence. One stayed long enough to see the harvest, the other didn't. This pattern repeats throughout life. People often overestimate what they can accomplish in a month and underestimate what they can accomplish in a decade, because they focus on immediate results rather than compounded progress. Compounding is one of the most powerful forces in existence, not only financially, personally, mentally, emotionally, professionally. Every improvement compounds, every lesson compounds, every habit compounds, every decision compounds. One extra book may not change your life, but 50 books might. One workout may not transform your body, but 1,000 workouts certainly will. One positive decision may seem insignificant, but thousands of positive decisions create a completely different future. That's how transformation works, quietly, gradually, consistently, until one day people call it overnight success. Yet nothing about it happened overnight. The visible breakthrough was simply the final result of years of invisible effort, and invisible effort requires a special kind of confidence. The confidence to continue without immediate recognition, the confidence to continue without applause, The confidence to continue when nobody believes in you yet. That confidence doesn't come from external validation. It comes from internal conviction, from knowing why you started, from knowing where you're going, from trusting your process. This is why purpose matters so much. Purpose creates endurance. Purpose creates resilience. Purpose creates direction. When your purpose is clear, temporary difficulties become easier to navigate. Because you're connected to something larger than discomfort. You're connected to meaning, and meaning is powerful. Meaning allows people to endure challenges that would otherwise seem unbearable. Meaning transforms sacrifice into investment. Meaning transforms effort into fulfillment. Meaning transforms obstacles into lessons. Without purpose, work becomes exhausting. With purpose, work becomes meaningful. The activity may be identical, but the experience becomes completely different. That's why one of the most important questions you can ever ask yourself is this: why? Why are you pursuing your goals? Why do they matter? Why are they important? Why are you willing to sacrifice for them? The stronger your reason, the stronger your commitment. The stronger your commitment, the greater your consistency. And consistency ultimately determines results. Now let's address something else that often prevents growth: fear. Fear is universal. Every successful person you've ever admired has experienced fear. Every leader, every entrepreneur, every performer, every creator, every innovator. Fear is not evidence that you're incapable. Fear is evidence that you're human. The goal is not eliminating fear. The goal is acting despite it. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is movement in the presence of fear. Many people wait until they feel completely confident before taking action. But confidence rarely comes first. Action comes first. Then confidence follows. Confidence is built through evidence. Evidence is built through action. Action creates experience. Experience creates competence. Competence creates confidence. That's the sequence, not the other way around. You don't wait until you're confident to begin. You become confident because you begin. This realization changes everything, because suddenly you stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop waiting for certainty. You stop waiting for permission. Instead, you start moving, imperfectly perhaps, but moving. And movement creates momentum. Momentum creates belief. Belief creates further action. The cycle strengthens itself. Eventually, what once seemed impossible begins feeling achievable, not because the challenge became smaller, because you became stronger. And that is perhaps the greatest lesson of all. Success is rarely about conquering the world. It's about conquering yourself, your excuses, your fears, your limitations, your procrastination, your self-doubt, your inconsistency, your unwillingness to grow. Because once you begin mastering those internal battles, the external battles become far easier to navigate. And that's when life starts changing in remarkable ways. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily, consistently, powerfully. One decision at a time, one habit at a time, one lesson at a time, one day at a time, and before long you'll look back and realize something extraordinary. The person you once were no longer exists. A stronger version has taken their place, a wiser version, a more disciplined version, a more capable version, a version capable of creating results that once seemed impossible. And that transformation is the true reward, because success isn't only about what you achieve, it's about who you become while achieving it. Now let's talk about one of the most underestimated forces in human achievement: vision. Not eyesight, not imagination alone. Vision. The ability to see a future that does not yet exist and believe in it strongly enough to begin building it. Every meaningful accomplishment begins as an idea. Every company, every invention, every movement, every breakthrough, every success story. At one point, it existed only in someone's mind. Before it became reality, it was vision. And vision is what gives direction to effort. Without vision, hard work becomes random. Without vision, discipline loses purpose. Without vision, motivation fades quickly. Because people can endure almost any challenge when they understand where they're going. But when direction disappears, even small obstacles feel overwhelming. That's why vision matters. It creates clarity. And clarity creates power. Think about a ship crossing the ocean. Storms may come, waves may rise, conditions may change. But as long as the destination remains clear, the captain can adjust the course and continue moving forward. Life works the same way. You don't need every detail figured out.
You don't need to know every step. You don't need perfect certainty. You simply need a clear direction. Unfortunately, many people spend years drifting, not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack ability, but because they lack vision. They react to life instead of designing it. They respond to circumstances instead of creating outcomes. They allow external forces to determine their future, and over time, drifting becomes a habit, a dangerous habit, because life rarely rewards passive participation. The greatest opportunities often belong to people who move with intention, people who know what they want, people who know why they want it, people who are willing to pursue it relentlessly. Vision doesn't guarantee success, but lack of vision almost guarantees mediocrity. Because if you don't decide where you're going, someone else eventually will. Society will. Circumstances will. Other people's expectations will. And before long, you may find yourself living a life that was never truly your own. That's why one of the most important things you can do is define success for yourself. Not according to social media, not according to society, not according to other people's expectations, according to your values, your priorities, your purpose, your vision. Because success looks different for different people. For some, success means building a company. For others, it means raising a strong family. For some, it means achieving financial freedom. For others, it means creating impact. Neither is inherently better. What matters is alignment. A life aligned with your values creates fulfillment. A life disconnected from your values creates frustration. Many people climb ladders only to discover they were leaning against the wrong wall. They spend years pursuing goals they never truly wanted. Years chasing approval instead of purpose. Years building an image instead of building a life. Then one day, they arrive at the destination and realize it doesn't satisfy them. Why? Because the goal belonged to someone else's vision, not theirs. That's why self-awareness is essential. You must know yourself, know what matters to you, know what energizes you, know what fulfills you, know what kind of life you're trying to build. Because clarity eliminates confusion, and confusion is expensive. Confused people hesitate. Confused people procrastinate. Confused people constantly change direction. Clear people move. Clear people decide. Clear people execute. The clearer your vision becomes, the easier decisions become. Suddenly, opportunities can be evaluated through a simple question. Does this move me closer to my vision or farther away? That question alone can save years of wasted effort. Because not every opportunity is your opportunity. Not every open door should be entered. Not every possibility deserves your attention. One of the most important skills you'll ever develop is the ability to say no. No to distractions. No to unnecessary commitments. No to opportunities that don't align with your goals. No to activities that consume energy without creating value. Successful people often appear productive because of what they do, but they're equally successful because of what they refuse to do. Focus is not merely deciding what matters. Focus is deciding what doesn't, and that's becoming increasingly difficult in a world built around distraction. Every day, people compete for your attention. Advertisements, notifications, social media, entertainment, news, endless streams of information. The modern battle isn't always for money. It's often for attention. Because attention determines direction. Whatever captures your attention consistently eventually influences your future. If attention is scattered, progress becomes scattered. If attention is focused, progress accelerates. This is why deep work is becoming so valuable. The ability to focus on one meaningful task without distraction is increasingly rare. And because it's rare, it's valuable. Most people spend their lives reacting. The highest performers spend large portions of their lives creating. There's a difference. Reaction is driven by circumstances. Creation is driven by vision. Reaction waits. Creation initiates. Reaction follows. Creation leads. And leadership always begins with self-leadership. Before you can lead others, you must learn to lead yourself. Your thoughts, your actions, your habits, your emotions, your choices. This isn't always easy. In fact, it's often difficult. Because human beings naturally seek comfort. Comfort feels safe. Comfort feels familiar. Comfort feels predictable. But growth rarely occurs inside comfort zones. Growth requires stretching, expanding, risking, learning, failing, adapting. And that process can feel uncomfortable. Yet discomfort is often evidence of development. Think about physical training. Muscles grow through resistance. Without resistance, growth stops. The same principle applies to life. Without challenge, development slows. Without risk, opportunity shrinks. Without discomfort, transformation becomes unlikely. This doesn't mean recklessness, it means courage. The courage to move beyond familiar limitations. The courage to attempt something meaningful. The courage to grow. One of the biggest regrets people experience later in life is not failure, it's inaction. The opportunities they never pursued, the conversations they never had, the dreams they never attempted, the risks they never took. Because failure often teaches lessons. Inaction creates questions, and unanswered questions can remain for decades. What if? What could have happened? What might have been possible? Those questions become heavy over time, far heavier than temporary failure. That's why action matters, even imperfect action, even small action. Because movement creates possibilities. Stillness rarely does. This doesn't mean every decision will be correct. It won't. Mistakes are inevitable. Errors are inevitable. Misjudgments are inevitable. But mistakes made while moving forward often teach valuable lessons. Mistakes made while pursuing growth often create wisdom. And wisdom is one of life's most valuable assets. Wisdom allows you to recognize patterns, to make better decisions, to avoid unnecessary mistakes, to navigate complexity more effectively. And wisdom is usually earned, not inherited, not purchased, earned. Through experience, through observation, through reflection, through action. Which is why experience remains one of the greatest teachers. Some lessons can only be learned by living them. Some truths can only be understood through experience. And every experience contains value if you're willing to learn from it. Even failures, especially failures. Because failure provides information. Failure reveals weaknesses. Failure exposes blind spots. Failure teaches adaptation. Failure builds resilience. The people who eventually achieve extraordinary things are rarely those who avoid failure. They're the people who learn from it fastest, who adjust quickly, who improve continuously, who refuse to let setbacks define them. Instead, they allow setbacks to refine them. And refinement is a lifelong process. The strongest leaders continue learning. The most successful entrepreneurs continue learning. The most effective performers continue learning. Because growth never truly ends. The moment growth stops, decline begins. That's why humility is so powerful. Humility keeps you teachable. Humility keeps you curious. Humility keeps you open to improvement. Arrogance closes doors. Humility opens them. And in a rapidly changing world, adaptability and humility create enormous advantages. People who continue learning remain relevant. People who stop learning eventually become outdated. No matter how successful they've been in the past, the future belongs to learners, to builders, to creators, to people willing to evolve. And that's exactly why your future remains full of possibility. Because regardless of where you are today, growth remains available, improvement remains available, opportunity remains available, a better future remains available, as long as you're willing to continue becoming. Because success is not reserved for a select few. Success is available to those willing to grow into it. And growth begins the moment you decide that who you are today is not the final version of who you can become. Now let's talk about something that every successful person eventually faces: failure. Not the idea of failure, not the fear of failure, actual failure, the kind that hurts, the kind that embarrasses you, the kind that makes you question yourself, the kind that forces you to decide whether you're going to continue or quit. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid failure. They treat failure as evidence that something has gone wrong, as evidence that they're not capable, as evidence that they should stop. But successful people eventually discover a different truth. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is often part of success. In fact, many of the lessons that create extraordinary results can only be learned through setbacks. Think about it. How often do people learn the most during periods of comfort? Not very often. Comfort rarely forces growth. Comfort rarely exposes weaknesses. Comfort rarely demands adaptation. Challenge does. Failure does. Adversity does. Those experiences reveal things that success often hides. They expose blind spots. They reveal weaknesses in strategy. They highlight flaws in preparation. They teach lessons that achievement alone cannot teach. That's why some failures become incredibly valuable, painful, but valuable. The problem is that most people interpret failure incorrectly. They make it personal. Instead of saying, that approach didn't work, they say, I'm not good enough. And those are very different conclusions. One creates growth, the other creates limitation. Failure is information. That's all. Information about what worked, information about what didn't, information about what needs adjustment. The people who achieve extraordinary things understand this. They don't allow temporary outcomes to become permanent identities. A failed business doesn't make them a failure. A failed investment doesn't make them a failure. It makes them experienced. It gives them data. It gives them lessons. It gives them insight, and insight is valuable. Every successful entrepreneur can tell stories about ventures that didn't work. Every investor can tell stories about mistakes. Every athlete can tell stories about losses. Every leader can tell stories about setbacks. The difference isn't that successful people avoid failure. The difference is that they recover from it faster. They learn faster. They adapt faster. And because they adapt faster, they continue progressing while others remain stuck. One of the most dangerous things you can do is allow fear of failure to prevent action, because when fear controls decisions, opportunities disappear. Think about how many dreams die before they ever begin, not because they were impossible, because someone was afraid. Afraid of embarrassment, afraid of criticism, afraid of rejection, afraid of uncertainty, afraid of failing. Fear becomes a prison when it starts making decisions for you. And unfortunately, many people spend decades inside that prison. They convince themselves they're being realistic, but often they're simply being fearful. There is a major difference. Realism acknowledges challenges. Fear exaggerates them. Realism prepares. Fear paralyzes. Realism creates strategy. Fear creates excuses. And if you're not careful, fear will disguise itself as logic. It will sound reasonable. It will sound responsible. It will sound intelligent. It will provide endless reasons why now isn't the right time, why the goal is too ambitious, why the risk is too high, why the odds are too low, why success belongs to someone else. Meanwhile, years pass, opportunities disappear, potential remains unused, and eventually people wonder what happened. Nothing happened. That's the problem. They never acted. Action is what separates possibility from reality. Without action, potential remains potential forever. The cemetery of unrealized dreams is filled with talented people who never took action, not because they lacked ability, because they lacked courage. Courage is not confidence. That's another misconception. Many people think successful individuals feel fearless. They don't. They simply act despite fear. They move anyway. They decide anyway. They try anyway. That's courage. Waiting until fear disappears is a losing strategy, because fear rarely disappears completely, especially when you're pursuing something meaningful. The bigger the opportunity, the greater the uncertainty. The greater the uncertainty, the greater the fear. That's normal. Every worthwhile goal involves risk. Every worthwhile dream involves uncertainty. Every worthwhile achievement requires courage. Think about the first time someone starts a business. They don't know exactly how things will unfold. Think about someone changing careers. They don't have guarantees. Think about someone investing in themselves. They can't predict every outcome, yet they move forward. Why? Because growth requires uncertainty. There is no growth without it. You cannot become stronger while remaining completely comfortable. You cannot become more capable while avoiding challenge. You cannot create a different future while repeating the same decisions. At some point, risk becomes necessary. Not reckless risk, calculated risk, intentional risk, the risk of trying, the risk of believing, the risk of growing, the risk of becoming more. And here's something important. The risks people fear early in life often become the regrets they fear later in life. When people reach the end of their lives, they rarely regret the risks they took and learned from. They regret the opportunities they ignored, the conversations they avoided, the dreams they abandoned, the goals they postponed indefinitely, because regret compounds. Just like success, year after year, choice after choice, until one day a person looks back and realizes they spent more time protecting themselves from failure than pursuing success. That's not a life most people want, and that's why courage matters. Not because courage guarantees success, because courage creates possibility. Possibility creates opportunity. Opportunity creates growth. Growth creates transformation.
Now let's discuss another challenge that often appears alongside fear: criticism. If you want to accomplish anything meaningful, people will have opinions, some supportive, some skeptical, some negative. That's unavoidable. No matter what path you choose, someone will disagree. Someone will criticize. Someone will question your decisions. Someone will doubt your abilities. The mistake is believing criticism means you're on the wrong path. It doesn't. Sometimes criticism means you're doing something noticeable. Sometimes criticism means you're challenging expectations. People often criticize what they don't understand, or what threatens their own comfort zones, or what highlights possibilities they haven't pursued themselves. You cannot allow every opinion to become your reality. Otherwise, your life will be controlled by whoever speaks the loudest. And that's dangerous, because most critics aren't living your life. They don't carry your responsibilities, they don't share your vision, they don't understand your purpose, which means they shouldn't determine your direction. This doesn't mean ignoring feedback. Constructive feedback is valuable. Wise advice is valuable. Mentorship is valuable. But there's a difference between useful guidance and destructive criticism. One helps you improve, the other tries to make you retreat. Learning to distinguish between those two things is essential. Because if you listen to everyone, you'll become confused. If you fear everyone, you'll become passive. If you try to please everyone, you'll become exhausted. The most successful people eventually accept a simple truth: not everyone will approve, and that's okay. Approval is optional, purpose is not, progress is not, growth is not. You don't need universal agreement to pursue meaningful goals. You need conviction, you need clarity, you need commitment. One of the most powerful moments in personal development occurs when you stop seeking permission, when you stop waiting for everyone to understand, when you stop requiring unanimous approval before taking action. That's freedom, because now your future is determined by your choices, not by other people's opinions. And freedom creates momentum. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence creates further action. The cycle continues. Over time, something remarkable happens. The fears that once seemed enormous begin shrinking, not because the world changed, because you changed. The obstacles didn't become smaller. You became stronger. The uncertainty didn't disappear. You became more capable of handling it. The criticism didn't stop. You became less dependent on it. The risk didn't vanish. You became more resilient. That's how growth works. Growth doesn't remove challenges. Growth increases your capacity to handle them. And that capacity is what eventually separates average results from extraordinary results. Because success is rarely about avoiding difficulty. It's about developing the strength to move through difficulty again and again, until the person you become is capable of achieving things the old version of yourself could never imagine. And that transformation begins the moment you stop asking, "What if I fail?" and start asking, "What if I succeed?" There comes a point in every person's journey when success stops being about achievement alone. At first, most people are focused on outcomes: more income, more opportunities, more recognition, more freedom, more security. And there's nothing wrong with that. Those desires are natural. In many ways, they serve as the spark that gets people moving. But if you continue growing, something interesting begins to happen. Your definition of success starts to evolve. You realize that success is not merely about what you accumulate, it's about who you become while accumulating it. It's about the person staring back at you in the mirror. Because eventually, the excitement of external rewards begins to fade. The bigger house becomes normal. The larger paycheck becomes expected. The promotion becomes old news. The achievement that once seemed life-changing eventually becomes part of everyday life. This is why people who tie their entire identity to external accomplishments often feel strangely empty after reaching goals they once believed would solve everything. They climb the mountain, they reach the summit, and then they discover they still have to live with themselves. That's why personal growth matters so much, because the greatest reward of success is not what you get, it's who you become. Think about it. Discipline changes you. Responsibility changes you. Persistence changes you. Courage changes you. Consistency changes you. Every challenge you overcome leaves a mark on your character. Every obstacle conquered increases your confidence. Every lesson learned expands your perspective. Over time, you become someone different, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone more capable. And that transformation is worth more than any material reward, because material rewards can disappear. Character remains, skills remain, Wisdom remains. Experience remains. No one can take those things from you. Markets can change, economies can change, circumstances can change. But once you've developed the qualities necessary for success, those qualities stay with you. And that's why investing in yourself produces the greatest return you'll ever receive. Many people spend years searching for opportunities outside themselves. They're looking for the perfect job, the perfect investment, the perfect business idea, the perfect timing, the perfect circumstances. But the greatest investment has always been staring back at them in the mirror. You, your knowledge, your skills, your habits, your mindset, your ability to solve problems, your ability to create value, your ability to adapt. The more you improve these things, the more opportunities naturally begin appearing, not because the world suddenly became easier, because you became more valuable. And value attracts opportunity. The marketplace rewards value. Relationships reward value. Organizations reward value. Communities reward value. The more value you bring, the more doors begin opening. This is one of the most powerful principles in life. Focus less on what you want to receive. Focus more on what you can become, because what you become determines what you receive. Now let's talk about something many people overlook: legacy. Most people don't think about legacy when they're young. They're focused on survival, they're focused on building, they're focused on creating momentum. But eventually, another question emerges: what impact will my life have? What difference will my efforts make? Who will be better because I was here? Those questions matter, because true success eventually expands beyond personal gain. It begins including contribution, influence, service, leadership, helping others grow, helping others avoid mistakes you've already made, helping others believe in themselves, helping others see possibilities they couldn't see before. The most fulfilled people often discover that contribution creates a deeper satisfaction than achievement alone. Achievement says, I succeeded. Contribution says, I helped others succeed. And there is something profoundly meaningful about that. Think about the people who have influenced your life: teachers, mentors, parents, leaders, authors, friends, coaches. Chances are you remember them not because of what they owned. You remember them because of how they impacted you, because they changed your thinking, because they encouraged you, because they challenged you, because they believed in you. That's legacy. And every person has the opportunity to create it, not someday, now, through daily actions, through integrity, through kindness, through leadership, through example. You never know who is watching. You never know whose life you're influencing. You never know which conversation might change someone's future. That's why excellence matters, not just for your own benefit, but for everyone your life touches. People notice more than you realize. Children watch, friends watch, coworkers watch, family members watch, strangers watch, and often they learn more from your actions than your words. That's why becoming the best version of yourself is not selfish. It's one of the most generous things you can do. Because when you elevate your life, you give others permission to elevate theirs. When you demonstrate discipline, others notice. When you demonstrate courage, others notice. When you demonstrate resilience, others notice. When you continue growing despite setbacks, others notice. Your example becomes evidence that growth is possible, and evidence is powerful. Now let's discuss another important truth. Success compounds. Just like interest compounds. Most people underestimate the power of small daily actions because the results aren't immediately visible. One workout doesn't transform your body. One book doesn't transform your mind. One conversation doesn't transform your network. One day of discipline doesn't transform your future. But repetition does. Consistency does. Compounding does. The problem is that compounding is invisible at first. For weeks, it seems like nothing is happening. For months, progress feels slow. Sometimes for years, results appear modest. Then suddenly, the growth becomes visible. People call it overnight success. But it wasn't overnight. It was years of invisible progress finally becoming visible. That's how success usually works. Slowly, quietly, gradually. Then suddenly. Unfortunately, most people quit during the invisible stage. They stop before the breakthrough. They abandon the process before the results arrive. They become discouraged because they expected immediate rewards. But extraordinary results require extraordinary patience. And patience is becoming increasingly rare. We live in a culture obsessed with speed, instant messages, instant entertainment.
instant gratification, instant access. People want instant success too. But life doesn't work that way. The most meaningful achievements require time. Time to learn, time to grow, time to fail, time to adapt, time to master. That's why patience remains such a competitive advantage. Most people won't stay committed long enough. Most people won't remain disciplined long enough. Most people won't persist long enough, which means those who do automatically separate themselves from the crowd. The longer you're willing to stay committed, the fewer competitors remain. Think about that. Persistence is not merely about effort. Persistence is about duration. How long can you remain focused? How long can you remain disciplined? How long can you continue growing? Because eventually, time begins working in your favor. Your experience compounds, your skills compound, your relationships compound, your reputation compounds, your confidence compounds. Everything begins building upon itself, and suddenly opportunities appear that seemed impossible years earlier. Not because you got lucky, because you stayed consistent long enough for compounding to work. This is why quitting too early is so dangerous. You never get to experience the exponential phase. You never get to see what happens when years of effort begin paying dividends. You stop just before the rewards arrive. Successful people understand this. They know today's effort may not produce today's reward, but they also know today's effort contributes to tomorrow's reward. And that's enough. They trust the process. They trust the principles. They trust the compounding effect of consistent action. Now, let me ask you something. What would happen if you committed to becoming just 1% better every day? Not perfect, just better. A little more disciplined, a little more focused, a little more knowledgeable, a little more resilient, a little more intentional. What would your life look like in 1 year? 5 years? 10 years? The answer is extraordinary, because small improvements create massive outcomes over time. Most people dramatically overestimate what they can accomplish in a week, and dramatically underestimate what they can accomplish in a decade. A decade of growth changes everything. A decade of discipline changes everything. A decade of learning changes everything. A decade of persistence changes everything. The future is shaped by what you repeatedly do. Not occasionally, repeatedly. That's why your habits matter. That's why your mindset matters. That's why your daily choices matter. Because every day you're becoming someone. The question is, who? Who are you becoming? Are your daily actions creating the future you want, or pulling you further away from it? That's a question only you can answer. But it's a question worth asking often, because direction matters more than speed. You don't need to move faster than everyone else. You simply need to move consistently in the right direction. And if you do that long enough, the results become inevitable. Not immediate, but inevitable. Eventually, you'll look back and realize something remarkable. The life you once dreamed about became reality. Not because of one lucky break. Not because someone handed it to you. Not because circumstances suddenly became perfect. But because you became the kind of person capable of creating it. And that realization changes everything, because now you understand the truth. Success was never something you chased. Success was something you attracted through growth, through discipline, through persistence, through value, through character, through becoming more. And once you understand that principle, you'll never look at success the same way again. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want you to remember one thing. Everything you've heard today means absolutely nothing if it remains information. Information alone does not change lives. Action does. There are millions of people walking around with access to more knowledge than any generation in human history. They have books, courses, podcasts, videos, mentors, technology, unlimited information. And yet many of them remain stuck. Why? Because knowledge without action creates frustration. You know what to do, but you don't do it. You know what needs to change, but you don't change it. You know the habits you should build, but you never start. Eventually, the gap between what you know and what you do becomes painful. Because deep down you realize the truth. The problem isn't a lack of information. The problem is a lack of execution. And that's why the future belongs to people who act, not people who talk, not people who plan endlessly, not people who wait for perfect conditions. The future belongs to people who move, people who start before they're ready, people who keep going when others quit, people who continue learning when others stop growing.
People who refuse to settle. Think about your life for a moment. Where are you right now? Not where you want to be. Not where you hope to be. Where are you actually? Be honest. What habits are producing your current results? What beliefs are shaping your decisions? What standards are guiding your actions? Because your current life is not an accident. It is the result of thousands of decisions, thousands of habits, thousands of choices made over time. And if your current results are not where you want them to be, that's okay, because results can change. The future can change. Your circumstances can change, but only when you change. That's the principle that transforms lives. You don't need a completely different life. You need different actions, different habits, different standards, different thinking, different decisions. Small changes repeated consistently create massive transformations. Most people are looking for a breakthrough, but breakthroughs are usually the result of hundreds of invisible moments. Moments when nobody was watching. Moments when discipline won over comfort. Moments when courage defeated fear. Moments when persistence defeated doubt. Moments when someone decided not to quit. Those moments create the future. And here's something important. You do not need to become extraordinary overnight. You don't need to transform your entire life tomorrow. You don't need to solve every problem this week. You simply need to start. One step, one habit, one improvement, one decision. That's how every great achievement begins. One step. People see success and focus on the destination. They rarely see the years of effort behind it. They see the victory. They don't see the sacrifice. They see the results. They don't see the struggle. They see the confidence. They don't see the uncertainty. But every successful person has lived through those invisible chapters. Every successful person has experienced doubt. Every successful person has experienced failure. Every successful person has experienced setbacks. The difference is, they continued moving forward. And that's what I want for you. Forward movement, not perfection. Progress. Because progress creates momentum. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence creates belief. And belief fuels further action. That's how transformation begins. Now let me ask you a question. 5 years from today, where will you be? Think about it. 5 years, 60 months, over 1,800 days. Will you be stronger? Will you be wiser? Will you be more disciplined? Will you be more successful? Will you be living closer to your potential? Or will you be living the same year over and over again? The answer depends on what you do after this moment. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when conditions improve. Now, because the future is created in the present. Every decision matters. Every habit matters. And although that may sound intimidating, it's actually empowering. Because it means your future is not controlled by luck. It's not controlled by circumstances. It's not controlled by other people. It's influenced by your choices. And choices can change, starting today. There is something powerful that happens when a person finally decides to take ownership of their life. No more excuses. No more blaming. No more waiting. No more hoping someone else will solve their problems. Just responsibility. Just action. Just commitment. That moment changes everything. Because from that moment forward, growth becomes inevitable. Maybe not immediately, maybe not dramatically, but inevitably. The person who reads consistently becomes knowledgeable. The person who trains consistently becomes stronger. The person who practices consistently becomes skilled. The person who improves consistently becomes exceptional. Consistency is undefeated. Time is undefeated. Compounding is undefeated. If you align those forces with the right actions, your life changes. It has to. That's how the principles work. And the beautiful thing is that these principles are available to everyone. They don't care where you were born. They don't care about your past. They don't care about your mistakes. They don't care about your failures. They respond to action. They respond to discipline. They respond to persistence. They respond to value. Anyone willing to apply them can benefit from them. That's why hope is always available. No matter where you are today, no matter how many mistakes you've made, no matter how many opportunities you've missed, no matter how many times you've failed, your future can still be different. The next chapter has not been written yet. You still have pages left. You still have opportunities ahead. You still have time to become more. The question is not whether success is possible. The question is whether you're willing to become the person capable of creating it. Because that's what success really is. It's not luck. It's not magic. It's not an accident. It's the natural result of growth, of discipline, of responsibility, of persistence, of value, of character, of becoming. And when you understand that, something shifts inside you. You stop chasing success. You stop searching for shortcuts. You stop looking for easy answers. You stop waiting for perfect timing. Instead, you begin building yourself, building your habits, building your mindset, building your future, day by day, step by step, decision by decision, and eventually something remarkable happens. The life you once imagined starts becoming real, not because the world suddenly became fair, not because every obstacle disappeared, not because everything went according to plan, but because you became stronger than the obstacles. You became more disciplined than the distractions. You became more focused than the noise. You became more committed than the excuses. You became the person capable of achieving what once seemed impossible. And that, my friends, is the ultimate secret. Success is not something you chase. Success is something you attract by the person you become. So from this day forward, focus less on what you want. Focus more on who you are becoming. Raise your standards, strengthen your discipline, protect your mindset, invest in your growth, serve others, create value. Stay patient, stay persistent, keep moving forward, and never underestimate what can happen when an ordinary person commits to extraordinary consistency. Your future is waiting. Your potential is waiting. Your next level is waiting. The only question left is this: will you answer the call? Will you become the person your future requires? Will you take the first step? Because that step, that single decision, could change everything. Thank you.